Okay.
All my warnings.
All
So
right.
we're half hour in, and there you go.
Do we have to hit anything with this box that says got it?
Oh,
Yeah.
we have to all hit continue, I think.
Okay.
Oh,
Because we have to, the continue allows,
Okay.
it's a
Okay.
consent to.
Okay. Oh, I
that.
see.
It's surprising that the record, shouldn't it be red or something saying, telling you, or is yours
All
doing
I've
that,
got
Michael?
is got it.
Me too. Me too.
Huh,
Yeah, when I hit got it, that little thing went down and
Right.
it's
Huh.
no longer.
Okay, then I'll hit got it.
Okay,
That's what I
well,
did.
so I screwed up the first month because, again, technology is not always my friend.
Yeah, I'm Linda Schrader. In answer to Kathy's thought, I think part of being an American, and has always been, is we're conscious of an idea rather than an ethnicity. We expand ourselves. You know, what used to be the outsider is now, after 100 years, the insiders.
Give
And
me an example. Give me an
remarkable
example.
Yeah,
I don't know.
me too.
Give me an example. I don't
The
know what
Irish.
you mean by that. Okay.
The Irish,
You
okay.
cannot get more American than Irish American, yet 100 years ago, they are not American.
Right.
They live in cities, they do the scut work,
Mhm.
and
And yet the natives of North America are not the insiders
not because we've never had
because we've never defined them as such.
Right.
well, we've never defined them, period.
Okay,
I would
I want-
argue that they've never been defined because we've never let them define themselves.
We defined them as savages and said they were not. I mean, we defined them as savages.
somebody else
and
is coming
put them
in.
on reservations
Okay, where would you have them live?
where they originally lived, and we'd have to work around it.
Okay, and how many people are running to South Dakota? You know, it's not Florida. Their ancestral hunting grounds, their places are difficult places to live.
But the Trail of Tears started in
Well,
where?
that's the Cherokee and that's the 1830s.
And that's Tennessee. I mean, we pushed them out west, but that's not where they, I mean, we have not done very many good things, nice things to our own people as
like we kind of-
Americans.
It's like we kind of corralled them into little places.
Well, we killed them into that. If you didn't go, we'd shoot you.
Yeah,
We'd
but
shoot you dead.
what I want us to
Even
understand,
now,
A lot of American history is not pretty. I mean, we stole Texas, Arizona, most of the Southwest from New Mexico. And if I'm not mistaken, we're the only country that ever attacked Canada. And we probably would have done the same thing if we had been successful.
Well, Mr. Murder just took one of the things that I was going to say when Mike was talking previously. We tried to invade Canada twice and we failed twice.
really?
And if we succeeded once, would there be a French-speaking province? And the answer is no.
Correct.
But the point is, empires don't care.
Mm.
They conciliate. Republics don't. If you want capitalism to succeed, you can't speak many languages, not in one nation. And so when we bemoan, oh, poor us, we've been this to everyone, we have to think in their world, not in ours. Their world did believe, for all the shame that it now is to us, in an exceptionalism that I don't buy into. But it brought the rest of the world to North America. I mean, as much as I'm ashamed of how we became who we became sometimes, people came here. We didn't make that part up. They came here fleeing other parts of the world
That's
to
right.
make it in this one. We're their descendants. And yeah, we did trample a lot of people. But I am not, in that sense, thinking that those people made a mistake to come here.
Mhm.
They didn't.
I just think that's a separate issue from the Native American, from indigenous peoples and what we
Right.
did to them.
I
Those
just
are
want
two
to
different
expand-
issues.
I just want the word nativism to be expanded a little here. It has nothing to do specifically with just attitudes towards indigenous peoples.
I understand that.
Yeah, that it's a polite word for racism, that people who are, you know, again, we see ourselves in one vein as the melting pot, but periodically in our history, well, we're seeing a wave of white supremacy arising right now. In the 1850s, we had the Know Nothings. In the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan went against not simply Blacks, against Jews, against Catholics, against Southern Europeans in general, and that's that part of, because they're not part of our culture. And we've had movements where we say we want English spoken only, or whatever it might be, rather than accepting the diversity and the enrichment that multiple languages gives the country. And that's been an element of who we are. And it really starts off with our sense of our Anglo-Saxon heritage, which enabled us to be the authors of the first democratic republic to make it in this world.
Well, and I think it's interesting that we still use the melting pot definition, because I think at best we're a very flawed salad. There are very individual pieces that don't always fit together. Again, because people don't want to do that melting, you know?
Yes. All right. This is going to be the last slide I'm going to put up here, but I'm going to do it. And this one should say, here it is. Normally, when we talk about American history, and in any country, you divide it into convenient periods. We've got the Revolutionary period, we've got the antebellum period, we've got the Civil War, we've got Reconstruction, we've got the Gilded Age, we've got the Progressive Era, we've got the Depression, and we break it into these divisions, and probably about 15 or 20 divisions for American history, and we're a relatively short history. I actually think in our country to this point, 7 divisions, if we're looking at it through the question of being a superpower. And then we look at the world a little bit differently. And this, I'm going to look at the first 5 of these tonight. Okay. But the first century or so, from the writing of the Constitution to 1898, that's when we were, if we don't call taking land from indigenous peoples imperialism, and we didn't on that, then we were not imperialists. We were isolationists. Okay. Then 1898, we became imperialists. We had the Spanish-American War, and we took territory. We took Cuba, we took the Philippines, among others. Then we retreat back into isolationism, and World War I, Wilson comes out with his idealistic idea to fight a war that will make the world safe for democracy, and that we're going to dismantle all of this system of balance of power, the international system of alliances, and we're going to create a world in which there will be no war. Okay, we retreat from that. World War II is not on the horizon. It's being fought in Europe. And many people want us to join the fight, and many people don't. And the people who lead the fight against our joining the war is called the America First Movement, and we are there. I could have put another date in there, which was December 7th, 1941. That's when events forced us out of our isolationism, and we stepped onto the world stage, and we haven't left the center of that stage ever since. We have been the superpower, and we have exercised those political, economic, and diplomatic muscles and military muscles since 1941. The rest of our history I would divide into the Cold War, and then the collapse of the Soviet Union brings us to 1990 and the present, with the war on terror and everything else that's there. But so those are the divisions that matter.
Michael, are you saying then, by your analysis, that we became a superpower in the area of number 5?
At the end of number 5.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. And again, defining superpower, a superpower, not as being powerful, but as exercising it on the international stage, of being the leader, of being enjoined in various alliances, in overseeing what's going on in Southeast Asia or in the Middle East or in Africa. All of a sudden, those became our concerns, and we had to have a hand in overseeing what was going to happen and how it was done. Up until that point, with the two exceptions of 1898 and Woodrow Wilson in the latter stages of World War I, we were outside. We did not want to be. We did not want that responsibility. We were quite happy for Britain to have it. Britain for decades was really a declining power, but they liked being the chief diplomatic country in the world, and they liked playing that game until they didn't like it, until it just got too wearing, too costly. Their economy fell apart, and the Middle East was an impossible situation for them, and they just pulled out.
But did Britain, when they were doing all that land grabbing and taking over, were they also interested in I forget, it's been so long, creating alliances with other countries, or were they just interested in becoming a bigger imperial empire? Do you know what I mean? Like it seemed to me like once we got involved, we wanted a piece of everybody's business. Whereas, Britain
I think,
just wanted a big piece of their business.
Yeah, I think at the beginning, the British would have been interested in creating an empire. As they create a commonwealth, it is more realizing, well, maybe we can't be the colonial power over them, but we need to have these alliances, economic and otherwise.
But it was alliances within their
sphere.
Sure. It
Absolutely.
wasn't, I mean, until after World War II, it was Britain, America, and who else that divided up all those countries? It was
Soviet
Britain.
Union.
I'm sorry, who?
I would have said a nascent communist Soviet Union.
Because Britain was pulled into that, right? They weren't out to do that. I don't think Britain ever cared as much as we did about getting in other people's business.
I mean, I would define the Cold War as building spheres of influence. Where's the American sphere of influence? We don't necessarily have to be colonial leaders of them, but they are on our team, in our camp, and the Soviet building their sphere of influence. And in prior decades, it was the French and the British and the Dutch and whatever European powers trying to divide up spheres of influence around the world, sometimes through literal colonial enslavement, but other times through economic and other kinds of alliances. That's the nature of the world. In World War I, Wilson was trying to say we need to dismantle that system because it only leads to one place: more wars. And it does. I think he's right there. All right, I'm going to look at the 1787 to 1898 period here, actually, the first place to start is a little bit before that. We fought in the Revolution, a war of independence against Britain, but we could not have won it without the aid of France. And we went and we made a treaty with France. You help us, and when you need help, we'll come to your aid. Okay. That's exactly what Washington in his farewell address said never to do, because you're going to get pulled into. How long do you think it's going to be before Britain and France have their next war? Every couple of years in this era. I mean, it was just one war after another, some of them on the large scale. I mean, the First World War in history really is probably the what we call the French and Indian War, because it was fought in India, it was fought in Europe, it was fought in the Americas. It was a world war, and very costly. All right, we made that deal. We made that treaty. Now Washington becomes president. France and Britain go to war. And France taps us on the shoulder and says, remember that treaty we signed? We need your help. And Washington says, yeah, we're not going to honor that treaty.
That's a big song in Hamilton.
And not only that, remember the capitalist religion that says economic, industrial, commercial prosperity is one of our gods, one of the things that we hold dearest to ourselves. He defined American neutrality this way, and this is to our former ally who helped us get our freedom from the British, that we could trade with both belligerents in the war. So we're trading and helping the British, and we're trading with the French and helping them. And the French are looking, well, it's one thing for you not to come to our aid. You're also going to help our enemy. You're also going to profit from dealing with the people we're at war with. And that's going to be lead to our first war as in America under the Constitution, the Quasi-Naval War with France. Because what does France do? They start to stop our shipping that's in the North Atlantic heading towards Britain. And they start to conscript some of our American sailors and make them British Navy men. That obviously angers the Americans, and we end up going to war. It was an undeclared war, but when people are getting killed, it's a war. And again, what ultimately is the trigger for the war? They're hurting our trade. They're hurting our pocketbooks. We were sending ships loaded with goods to sell to Britain, and they're taking them. Okay. Now, next comes the second war that we fight is the, I'm going to skip the Tripoli Pirates for a minute, is the War of 1812. Now, we're fighting the British, but we didn't get pulled into it by an alliance. We got pulled into it because Britain is doing the same thing to us, only on a greater scale than the French did. They're stopping our ships. They're conscripting our men and our merchant sailors and making them British sailors. And also, one of the things in our definition of American isolationism was hegemony on this continent. Well, the British, after the revolution, were supposed to abandon their forts in what would have been Indian territory. They didn't. And they were conniving with the Indians to cause us all kinds of havoc. And we said, wait a minute, you're hurting us economically. You're keeping a stronghold on our territory. You violated 2 of the 5 tenets that we hold in terms of our defined isolationism. This means war. And so we had that war. And the third war was strictly economic. It was the Tripoli Pirates who, not for political reasons, strictly economic, they were doing what pirates do. They were stopping ships and robbing them. I mean, pirates do that today. Pirates did that 1,000 years ago, I am assuming. That's the definition of being a pirate. Well, you hurt us economically, and we are going to be after you. Again, that period lasted for more than 100 years, where we could say we are isolationists because we don't go out and colonize the world. We take land from indigenous peoples. We push westward over the continent, but we're not imperialists like you bad Europeans. But if you hurt our pocketbooks, then we will go to war. And they hurt our pocketbooks. And so we went to war. That really, and another element of the isolationism was our tendency towards nativism. During the last half of the 19th century, opportunities were presented to us to annex various countries in the Caribbean: Cuba, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Guatemala, Honduras. We turned them down. And the question is, why did we turn them down? The major reason we did was, if you go into all those countries, what is the population made of? People of African descent, Hispanics, and indigenous peoples.
The others.
Not good material to be good Americans and to put the protection of our democratic republic in their hands. And so it was clearly a call based on the sense of Anglo-Saxon superiority. And one of the reasons I hate almost to say that phrase, it sounds so like Aryanism, in the Second World War with the Nazis, that we have superior culture, and we can't have it diluted by these people who are not capable of being fully American.
Well,
And-
and that hasn't gone away much, Michael. As you're
Really?
talking, I just got an email thing that popped up on the front of my screen
Mm-hmm.
saying the US is holding more than 9,000 people under a bridge near Texas as a surge of migrants, mostly from Haiti, overwhelms the border patrol.
Yep.
We haven't gotten very far. We've not evolved very much in all those years, you know?
well, wait until you see the political fight that comes up as Afghan refugees
Oh my God, it's already
start to
started. for
be,
sure. Yep.
where do we place them?
Yeah.
Other countries will take some, but America's going to have to take some percentage of them.
Well, other countries have started not taking them either.
Yeah, well, that is also, but Germany, I know, has taken a fair amount, I think, or
But we
agreed.
were, I mean, Russia gave up much earlier. We were there 20 years, and many of those people helped us. Once again, where are our values, you know?
Okay.
They helped us take out the Russians, yeah.
And if you think about over the last half of the 20th century on, how many times did we fund a group? The Taliban was originally funded by us
Mhm.
to help fight the Russians. Almost every Noriega, you name a dictator, he started by being funded and supported by us because he was working in support of some immediate short-term political goal of ours. And then all of a sudden, Osama bin Laden wasn't he on the CIA payroll or some?
Probably some member of his family somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, they were an important Yemeni Saudi family. The bin Ladens are not poor.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Always follow the money.
Mhm.
Well, he actually he rejected the money.
He did.
That's the
He
irony.
personally,
He's a
right.
true believer,
Right.
or was.
Okay. There are two periods where we go against Washington admonition and we become internationalists. And the first is 1898. And that's a very interesting one because it's a very pragmatic decision that gets made here. This is the Spanish-American War, and we become imperialists. And, we had passed the Monroe Doctrine to say, this hemisphere is ours. But in the Spanish-American War, we're going to get territories that are in the Pacific. We're going to get the Philippines. And we're going to get Cuba. Guam and American Samoa. I mean, we always wonder when did they come? When did we get those? How does American Samoa come about? Well, it was this war. And the question is, if for all this better part of a century, we had not turned to imperialism, what happened to change? And I think there are three factors. One, we had grown to be an economic juggernaut. This is a period, the last half of the 19th century, where this is the era of Morgan and Rockefeller and Carnegie and all these giants who I suspect if you took their income and adjusted it for current dollars, they might make Jeff Bezos look like a piker.
Mm.
I think that John D became, in terms of his assets, a billionaire in the late 1890s. Well, what would $1 billion in the 1890s be in 2020, 2021? I mean, it's a phenomenal amount of money. And when you have that kind of money, almost too much money, I mean, what was the 1790, 1897 was one of the economic depressions that we had. One of the major reasons for that depression is money was concentrated in the hands of so few families that they couldn't spend it fast enough. When you see places like the mansions up in Newport, they're being built because it is your patriotic duty as a rich person to spend money as fast as you can because the economy needs the grease of money going through it. And if you're just putting it in the bank, we're in trouble. So when you become that wealthy, all of a sudden you also get the idea, the world should take notice of us. We should have a stronger position in the world. We should be one of the power brokers. So there's that idea that's kind of percolating. The second, there was a historian named Frederick Jackson Turner. Now, some historians have said he was wrong, but it's unimportant. He said the frontier is closed. We already conquered it. And Americans who had, since their inception, been moving west, young man, all of a sudden wondered, what do we do next? And it's sort of like Alexander the Great, no more worlds to conquer. And so we said, well, maybe we need to look outside of ourselves. We were happy doing it while we were doing it, but we're done. What do we do next? And I think that was a factor in it. And the third is the pressure of the moment. This is the final wave of European colonialism. And they are viciously, and this is the most vicious phase of colonialism, they are going into Africa and Southeast Asia, and they are carving it up. And if we wait, it's all going to be carved up. You either get into the game now, or the game's over, and you're on the outside. I mean, it makes me think of The Godfather, where they want to get into heroin and other drugs, and Don Corleone says, no. But the answer is, if you don't get into it now, it's going to be gigantic, and you're going to be on the outside, and you will never recover. So get in the game. And so we did. But we got out of the game almost as fast as we got into it. It's a year or two. And I think the main trigger why we pulled out, again, remember this messianic view of ourselves as so pure that we are the purveyors of the ideals of democratic republicanism. We owned the Philippines. Well, the Philippines had a violent insurgency against us. They didn't want to be under our rule. And we had to put it down. And we put it down just like all the European imperialist powers did, very violently.
They still don't want to be under. They still don't want to be under our. They hate the bases there.
Absolutely. But Americans looked at that and they said, we don't like that look. That makes us look bad. And rather than that, let's just stop this. And so we did. We retrenched back into isolationism.
What year would you say this was, Michael?
1890, the war was 1898.
Oh, okay.
So 1899-ish. We said, that's enough.
Okay.
We did what we're doing. And then it's going to be World War II, and World War I, rather. World War I, it's interesting because in 1916, Woodrow Wilson ran for president on the slogan, I'm going to keep you out of this war. That's what Washington would have wanted. It's just another one of those European wars. They do this periodically, and a lot of people get killed, and a lot of money is spent, and economies break down. And you know what? If Europe wants to play that game, they can play it. We're not a part of it. That's what Washington would have said. And Wilson said, okay. But then Wilson got this idealistic streak in him, which says, wait a minute. This is just going to go on and on and on and on. And there's going to be one war after another. And you know what? When those countries go to war, we can make some profits selling them things, but economies get hurt so much, we get hurt too. So why don't we make a world that is safe, a war to end all wars, and make a world safe for democracy? And his idea was, we're going to dismantle this system of all these secret alliances and agreements that if I go to war, you'll go to war, and then they'll come in. I mean, if you look at the history of how World War I began, it starts off with that little assassination in Sarajevo, and all of a sudden, England's in, Austria's in, Russia's in, the whole damn world is in. And Wilson said, we're going to stop that. And in its place, we're going to build this League of Nations, which would have been the earlier version, say, of a United Nations. And we're going to find a way that there's not going to be these secret alliances. There's not going to be these wars. If there's a dispute, we'll have a central place to go to. We'll arbitrate it, and we'll stop it without fighting. The problem is, America didn't want to take on that role. We didn't join the League of Nations. We were the ones who helped to create it, but no, it couldn't pass the Senate, and it couldn't pass the muster of American approval. Americans didn't want it. Why? Because war was so damn costly. We had to mobilize something like 4 million soldiers. Over 100,000 of our soldiers died. 200,000 were seriously injured. Well, we don't need this. And it's just, we may go in saying we're going to create a world where there's no more war. We don't believe that. There's always going to be wars. And we're going to get pulled into them. And each one is going to cost us. And you know what? We quit. And we did. Now, I know I've gone on and on. The real focus here that to me is important is looking at the interwar years between 1919 and 1939. Interwar years, I have a list here I want to read. We could argue that isolationism was the right decision for America. We could argue, no. We need to have our hands in and be a part of the international decision-making because we have all this power and all these resources. And that makes sense. But
did we have all that power and resources, or was that our perception? Although perception is
economically we did.
We were the only country. We were the only country to come out of the war stronger and went into it.
Okay.
Richer.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So is it an American ideal or definition that richer is always stronger?
Probably.
It probably is, but it also is something that in practical terms is often valid.
True.
I would say that's the history of civilization.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay.
Or access to resources. Yeah, same difference.
When we talk about the beginnings of World War II, probably the person who takes the most hits for negatively in that period is Neville Chamberlain. He was the great appeaser. And he kept saying, well, Hitler, if you'll stop here, we'll be okay with it. And step by step, Hitler would go further and further and further. Well, if you really think about it in this whole period, and I know the Depression is in there, which economically knocks everybody on their pins.
Almost everybody.
Pretty close. Yeah.
Except the 1%. They'll always come out on top, right?
By everybody, I meant every country.
Oh, true.
Yeah. What Carnegie say, the man who has money in a crisis, he's a wise man. I mean, he's the great man. Okay. We were isolationist in this period. We withdrew and we watched the rise of fascism and militarism around the globe. And if you ever wanted to say, hey, here's a powder keg that is going to explode, it's happening right in front of us. Auden wrote a poem in which he was describing, we were on the verge of World War II, houses are on fire. And since my house isn't on fire, I don't do anything.
Right.
That's the gist of the poem. Well, we were watching fires all over the place. I'm just going to, this is a list of things that we just did nothing about, said nothing about. Japan invades Manchuria in 1931. Hitler pulls out of the League of Nations and rearms Germany. Italy invades Ethiopia. The Spanish Civil War breaks out and the Axis powers use the Spanish battlefields to rehearse their blitzkrieg strategies. And in the following 3 years, Germany will invade and annex Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland. And we're still sitting on the sidelines, saying nothing, doing nothing. And in terms of economic and productive might, we were the great power on the planet. We needed to flex our muscles at that point, and who knows how that changes history, but we did not because of that isolationist strain. And Roosevelt understood this. Oh, and also, well, Roosevelt understood this and tried to persuade and gave promises that we would do something, that we would help, but he never followed through. And Neville Chamberlain said, it's always best to count on nothing from the Americans but words, because we pontificated a little bit, but we did nothing. And that was a time when maybe if we had pulled out of our isolationist shell and tried to do something, we could have changed history significantly. I mean, when I taught farewell to arms in my English classes, I would tell the kids, World War I was the most devastating event the planet had ever known. 20 million casualties. And if you want a perspective on what that means, in the whole 19th century, the biggest war, defined as the war with the most casualties, was the Franco-Prussian War, 250,000. 250,000 to 20 million. Well, World War II is going to be over 50 million. And could something have been done in these interwar years had we stepped in? I suspect yes. And so if Neville Chamberlain gets to be knocked as the great appeaser, we ignored what was going on in front of us, and maybe we could have had some sort of hand in saying, no, 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 this is not the way it's going to go. But we didn't. Then we get to the final stage, which is 1939 to 41. And that's the American First. Roosevelt is trying as much as he can to get us into assisting the British, even if it's just economically, Lend-Lease and other programs. But he's moving slowly. He's making promises. He's not keeping them. And again, Churchill summed it up. Churchill was one of the wittiest speakers in his day. And he said, you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. And it finally took the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor to get us to move in there.
Right.
But also, I think there is something about World War II that is a different set of conditions that should have moved us away from isolationism. You've got Hitler, who probably is a more monstrous character than many of the leaders in wartime history. You have Europe in a state of utter collapse. The Nazis are just running over blitzkrieg fashion over Europe. France falls in a couple of weeks. Britain, if not for Dunkirk, could have been done for. And they're fighting not alone, but damn near alone. And they're losing on almost every front in the North Atlantic, in the Balkans, in North Africa. They need our equipment. Literally, the British are starving to death. They don't have food. They don't have munitions. They don't have tanks. They don't have planes. They don't have enough men. And the German army is just running roughshod over them. We needed to get in. And again, FDR kept promising and promising and promising, but not carrying through. And he had to fight with his Congress. But you also had this America First committee, and it had people in it like Joe Kennedy and Henry Ford. But the face of it was Charles Lindbergh, who said, it's just another European war. It's just like World War I. We can make the mistake and go in. We will lose hundreds of thousands of lives. We will spend all kinds of treasure. And in the end, the world will be what the world is, and Europeans are just going to do this again. It's not in our interest to step in here. But things were so bad. Kurt Vonnegut, who was one of my favorite writers as a kid, once said, the worst thing about Hitler, he made war seem like the right choice. He was that bad. But once we were bombed, we declare war on Japan. Germany declares war on us. And it doesn't matter what we think politically we ought or ought not to do. This is what we're going to do. We're in this one. Now, what we get to next month is the beginnings of the Cold War. And the beginnings of the Cold War are really about one question. Is it enough to win the war, or is it equally important to win the peace? And it's World War I showed us, if you don't win the peace, then you just get the next war. Now, question is, did we win the Cold War? Did we win the peace? Because almost immediately thereafter, we're fighting in Korea. Soon after that, we're in Vietnam. Soon after that, we've had a hell of a lot of wars in the last half of the 20th century, and continuing on now into the 21st century. So is there some sort of system that works? And if we're going to be the leaders of the free world, are we doing it right? Do we know how to do it? Have we figured anything out in the last 70 years? Or are we destined to do exactly what Britain did, which is exhaust our resources, collapse by the wayside, and somebody else takes over? China, Soviet Union gets rebuilt. I don't know what comes next. Any rate, I want to say thank you to you all for being here and for doing this. And next month will be the origins of the Cold War. And I'll try to remember to record from the beginning.
Okay.
We'll try to remind you, Michael.
Yeah,
you
And
may have
change
to.
that
Well.
font color.
That will get done.
Background and the
Right.
font color, so we could see it.
Yes.
Okay,
All
thank
right.
you.
Thank you all and have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Okay,
Right.
okay.
All
Take
right.
care.
Very good, everybody.